Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop, Emerald Planet. All the ecology news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's your host, Executive Director of the Emerald Planet, Dr. Sam Lee Hancock.
The Emerald Planet, as we come to you from Washington, D.C. in the United States, as we look around the globe in 143 different nations, looking for the best practices as far as technologies, products, and services as we move through the 21st century. So as we move towards 2050 and we're adding 2 billion new people to the globe, how are we going to build the financial wealth and security and the infrastructure that's needed to support a planet that's going from 7 to 9 billion people? That's the job and the prognosis of a gentleman sitting right beside me. His name is Sheldon L. Ray, Jr. He has a very long title: Portfolio Management Director, International Wealth Specialist, and Financial Advisor at Morgan Stanley Wealth Management. Whew. I'm sure they pay you according to your title, right, Sheldon?
Not at all.
Anyway, it's good to have you back.
It's good to be back.
I should say that Sheldon comes on with us and on a regular basis, actually, and talks about, it's kind of the state of the globe, if you will, but we're talking about this as far as where we're going in the future. So tell us a little bit about Morgan Stanley and what it does, and then we'll get into the meat of our discussion.
Sure. The firm is a global financial powerhouse, over 75 years old, and if I'm not mistaken, employs about 57,000 people worldwide.
That's a lot of people.
It is. I'm glad I don't run it. Having said that, all my comments are personal and not those of my employer.
Yes, and I know we have to put that in as a disclaimer. And let's move right in. You're here in Washington, D.C. Full disclosure, we're both Rotarians in the Rotary Club of Washington, D.C. You've done a stupendous job as far as the foundation monies for our Rotary Club. I wanted to throw that in for worldwide consumption. But
So
you're
far.
here in D.C.
Yes.
And yet you have worldwide clients, you're concerned about the world. So how does that work? You're here and you literally cover the whole globe.
Out of absolute necessity. I mean, my partner and I, Doug Richards, manage our own portfolio of equities and bonds for private clients, nonprofits like Rotary. And you have to have, your pulse on the world, because how much iron ore China's importing impacts a company like Rio Tinto or BHP.
BHP, which is Australian.
Exactly. So we own all those equities.
So it's really important that you understand, know about the markets. And I know from your background, because we've known each other for a long time, is that you actually have lived abroad, worked abroad. And that really goes in and fits in as far as your background and how you really try to manage the accounts that you have.
Absolutely. I lived in Hong Kong for about 5 years in the 1980s, visited China for the first time in 1986, and go back on a fairly regular basis. And it's important to see what's going on the ground, and to have watched Asia develop, on a first-hand basis over the last few decades is just absolutely fabulous.
Well, the whole thing about being fabulous, but you really have a pulse of what's going on because you're meeting people, you get to know them as persons, as human beings, you get to know their family, you see their kids growing up, they're going through the school system on into university. How does that actually help to mold and shape the way you look in the globe as far as what you see for the future and how these countries are functioning and actually the true growth of a country, not just what the media talks about?
Yeah, I guess I'm really fortunate to be in Washington because, as you know, we get to meet just about everybody. If they don't live here, they come here for one reason or another. And you learn to develop relationships with experts, regulators, journalists, diplomats, economists you can rely on. And then when you see those people quoted in one of your newspapers, you know who to believe and who not to believe. It just takes years of practice to figure out who those people are. But we're blessed to have so many right here in town.
Well, the whole thing about it, Sheldon, is really listening. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth. And this is something I've observed about you, is that you really listen to people. When people come to Rotary or we're out at business functions or what have you, you're always talking to people, but you're always listening. I think that's really the key key thing. So by having the listening ears, and this really goes to the heart of the investments and why it's important for clients, but also countries, is how does that really impact long-term what you see and the intuition you have about where it's going? Because you've shared that the media is saying one thing, like with Europe,
yes,
and the markets are going in an entirely different direction.
Exactly. I mean, the media is extremely useful, but there's just so much of it, and everybody's got to fill up so much space.
Now, this 24/7, 365 phenomenon.
Right, and I think in many cases it doesn't serve a good purpose. And case in point, the Euro gloom and doom news of last May and June was just absolutely appalling. There were major television stations reporting things like the day after the French elections, when Sarkozy lost to Holland. The headline on the news screen of a major station worldwide says, "Markets tumbling after French elections." This was noon Eastern time. Europe markets had closed 15 minutes earlier. The French market was up 3% that day. All of Europe was up. That was a fact.
So how do you think the media is not getting it correct? And what do you think really needs to be done as far as investors? Now, this really goes to the heart of it. Many people think investing is a science. I say it's more of an art. It's a lot of emotion involved in that.
Yes.
So how do you walk through people through this, and not just your clients, but the people that you're meeting, their leaders in these countries, so that they have a steady hand on the till as they're moving forward into the future?
I mean, it just takes a lot of effort and homework, tuning out the noise. The Europe bashing became fashionable. So people were falling all over themselves to report gloom and doom in Europe. I remember when my son, who's in the studio here, is 14, and we were in Europe this summer, and he was looking at this major news station we all know and love. I won't name at the moment. The Dow Jones market's falling because of whatever, kept coming across. So Alex looks at the bottom of the screen, bottom right-hand corner, and said, "Dad, it says Dow up 96 points." The same moment. I mean, it's difficult. I rely on Financial Times, as you know, the Wall Street Journal. Bloomberg is a reliable source. Many of these 24/7 stations, I think, that report financial news should be watched, but muted.
Yeah, take it with a grain of salt. Well, looking at it, it's just like the situation in Africa. When you hear about Africa, the 54 countries, all we hear about is war, pestilence, drought, and yet for the last 10 to 15 years, the steady growth,
right,
5.5%, 6%. You hear about all the drug wars in South America. Yet,
right,
except for a few of the smaller countries, they're doing very well. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So how do you work with the clients so that they know where they need to be, or you just say, look,
well, we
take
do our
care of
own,
it and
right,
sit back and let's go for the ride.
Yeah, we do our own analysis and try to find out the truth. That's the job every day, every hour. So our clients rely on us to make good decisions. If we do poorly, we will be terminated. So we're highly motivated.
Yeah. Well, the whole thing is just they say with the politicians, if they don't like us, they're elected. You can gerrymander those, but in the work you do, you can't gerrymander.
The numbers are the numbers.
Exactly.
But I think one little anecdote. I remember China's economy clearly slowed down in the first 3 quarters of last year. And it was fashionable at some point to report negative news about China, that it was never going to grow again rapidly. And I mean, I look at a lot of things, currencies, commodities, economic reports, but in August of last year, iron ore prices had collapsed about $88 a ton. It's very cheap.
Right.
Very scary. So those prices quickly rebounded to $118 and continued to the point now it's about $145. So while bad news is being reported about China's growth, I'm watching iron ore prices go up 20% in about 4 weeks. And I'm thinking that can only happen if someone's making steel. Mm-hmm. Probably China.
And it's going into some type of infrastructure or,
Which creates economic growth.
housing, whatever it is, because most of that's high rise and it's going to be steel and concrete.
Right,
and,
exactly.
And all those kinds of commodities. Looking at the slow but steady increase as far as the United States is concerned, it bumps along 1, 2, maybe
Right.
3%. Unemployment is dropping a little bit. You've got this convergence, and people are saying, well, things are, sometimes it's better than what we think it is, it's not as good as we think it is. But what do you see the impact of that on the world economy, and where are we going in the future? Because it looks like we're in this little increase as far as growth is concerned,
Right.
Slow decrease as far as employment. How do you see that convergence with the world economy?
It's important. Again, I'm not an economist. It does look like kind of a slow, steady growth, 2 to 3% GDP in the U.S. I think it's important to remember with the unemployment drop, which has now finally dropped below 8% in the U.S., that the last bad recession was in the early 1980s in the U.S. It was not quite as bad as this one, but it was pretty severe. Mm-hmm. Unemployment at that time was over 10%, I think 10.5. And it took 6 years to drop to 5.3%. So people have to be patient. Now, Chuck Vollmer is the next guest.
Yes.
And he can answer.
And he's going to answer a lot about
far
that.
better than I can on the
Chuck
U.S.
is
job
absolutely
situation.
Fantastic, and his Jobonomics movement. Well, one last question. We're almost running out of time. We have about 1 minute. Slow growth in Europe. The Japanese economy has been
showing some signs of life, I'm told.
But not too much.
No.
But yet, again, going back to many of the countries in Asia, you've got the African continent,
Right.
South America. In many cases, they're booming and/or they're growing at a very steady
Indonesia.
clip. So where's the new thrust? It looks like the new thrust is in this broad band of south of the equator and a little bit north of that. But that's where the real action is.
Yes, I mean, the economies have converged and companies can make money in every corner of the earth, and believe me, they do or try to. So I think that bodes well longer term.
And so the whole thing is, what we need to think about, Sheldon, is that we really need to look at the globe as the marketplace.
Right, but we are all interconnected, so when bad things happen, the ripple effect is far larger than it was 10, 20 years ago.
So I guess the axiom is then look around the globe, see what you're comfortable with. And I think this too is, we need to be aware of what our margin are as far as risk is concerned.
Risk is huge.
And that's really the key thing. Well, dear viewer, thank you for being with us. We'll be back again to talk more about this, specifically about these countries, as we look around the globe to create the Emerald Planet.
Some dreams are universal. Dreams that inspire us. Multiple sclerosis is a devastating disease that changes lives forever. The National MS Society does more for people with MS than any organization in the world. But we can't do it alone. To get involved, visit us online at nationalmssociety.org. or call 1-800-FIGHT-MS. This is why we're here. Because nobody dreams of having multiple sclerosis.
What's wrong with this picture? Half of young Americans can't locate economic powers like Japan and India. 20% can't even find the Pacific Ocean. Without geography, our children aren't ready for the world. Geography is everywhere. It's incredible creatures, rhythm, fashion, flavor. It's economics and politics. It's change. Understanding connections between people and places is critical in the 21st century. That's why we created mywonderfulworld.org. Go there now for your free parent and teacher action kits and give our kids the power of global knowledge. Because kids who understand our world today can succeed in it tomorrow.
We're back to the Inside Scoop Emerald Planet. Here again, your host, Dr. Sam.
Welcome to the Emerald Planet as we come to you from Washington, D.C. in the United States as we look around the globe in 143 different nations looking for the technologies, the service, and the products, and we can add to that the people that are making a difference as we move through the 21st century. This is one of those themes of paving the way to 2050, future Earth, and how we're going to actually take care of all the new people. As many of you know, you've heard this before on Emerald Planet, as the world is rapidly urbanizing as we go from 54% of the people living in urban areas to over 70% by 2050. But yet there's nations on the earth, and we're going to be talking about a few of those, where actually 87% of the people already live in urban areas. Example of that is Brazil. You look at China, they're building cities to accommodate 1 million people. They're building the cities to accommodate 1 million people as they're putting them up. And there'll be over 300 cities, which may be mega cities, over 300 of those in China alone by 2050, over 10 million people in 300 cities. It just boggles the mind, the urbanizations going on, and how we need to be prepared for that. Well, we have Sheldon L. Ray Jr. He's been on with us before, Portfolio Management Director, International Wealth Specialist, and Financial Advisor as Morgan Stanley Wealth Management. And we've talked about Morgan Stanley, what that is, but we really haven't talked about what Sheldon L. Ray Jr. does.
My partner and I, Doug Richards, manage our own portfolio for individuals and nonprofits of global equities and bonds. And we try to get the best returns possible, but more importantly, we want to make sure that our clients receive a steady income stream year in and year out from dividends and interest, regardless of market conditions.
And this is the whole thing, and that's why I like having you on, Sheldon. You've been on before. This whole thing about the stable income. This is something as we go from 7 to 9 billion people on the planet, we need to have stable income for a whole lot of folks.
Absolutely.
And there's got to be ways of doing that. We firmly believe in Emerald Planet that if we look at all the green type of things that are going on, the technology, services, products, people, programs, that we can actually do that. And you're part of that. So looking at going from the Morgan Stanley view, looking at China, you know, things have been slowing down a little bit. Costs are becoming increasing there to do business. Things are coming back into the United States for manufacturing. So there's really there's a fundamental shift going on. And what do you see? Maybe using China and the U.S. as an example, but let's extrapolate it across the globe.
Yeah, China is huge to global economic growth. Everyone knows that. China's economy will probably eclipse the size of the U.S. economy sometime in the next 10 to 20 years, maybe more. China's GDP came out for 2012 at about 7.9%. And the first 3 quarters of 2012, China slowed, but definitely ramped up toward the end of the year. The days of 9, 10, 11% GDP in China are probably gone, probably permanently. But the thing to keep in mind there is that not too many years ago, 5, 6 years ago, China's economy was worth about 4.6 trillion. It's now, I think, over 7.
So it's almost doubled in 5 years.
The law of large numbers. It's impossible for something that large to grow at those double-digit rates, but it still provides a similar amount of economic strength to the global growth outlook. And a lot of people were talking about 2013, first half of the year in China, growth exceeding 8% again, which would not surprise me. And I think longer term it will probably stay above 7.
Well, you know, it's just the dynamics, the numbers of people, the dynamics of the society, and so you really have so much in that mix. You have so many people coming in, even though they have the one-child policy, there's still growth. You have the most rapidly aging population on the planet, even faster than Japan now in China.
That's a problem.
And so there's some real fundamental changes going to have to go on in order to be able to accommodate this ever-increasing aging population that actually is living much longer than ever in the history of China.
Right, and you mentioned earlier the cost in China. So China is no longer the world's factory as it once was. Wages have increased dramatically to the point that it's not as competitive. So exports are not what they were to China's economy. However, the economy is imbalanced such that domestic consumption is too small as a percentage of GDP in China. So the higher wages will help domestic consumption to increase and become a more balanced economy.
Well, this is one of the things, too, I think, Sheldon, that China is doing. You know that they've had certainly challenges as far as the environment is concerned, but they're making fundamental investments in alternative energy. They're trying to reduce their dependency on fossil fuels, particularly coal, but also natural gas and oil. But they're really looking at the agricultural sector, the people out in the rural areas, and investing, you know, where they were giving refrigerators and stoves and these kinds of things to people living in the country area, really to spur quality of life, but really it's to spur the industrial sector for internal consumption instead of just depending on total exports.
And there are quite a few reforms coming into play in the rural areas especially. One of the problems in China is there has not been a social safety net, Medicare type programs, and these are being experimented with now so that people can pay into the government at very low rates and receive some social safety net stability so that the savings rate doesn't have to be so high, and then they can spend money to boost the economy. And one other factor about China that we hear a lot about is real estate bubble talk. Very fashionable in the media. A lot of hedge fund gurus talk about it. I don't think they know what they're talking about, but they would like it to happen so they can make money shorting China somehow. The key factor there with real estate in China, prices are very high, but there's a lack of leverage, unlike the US 5-6 years ago. 30% down minimum to buy a home in China, or 40%.
If you look at Russia, you know, some of those places it's 50%, you got to put it down, and it's in cash, you put it down, you're not borrowing the money in order to do your 30, 40, 50%, you have to have the cash.
So the likelihood of default is de minimis.
Right.
And that's what got us into trouble here in the US.
Well, I think this is one of the things that we forget about, that, you know, we're trying to look at the world market as things happen in the United States or Canada, Mexico, this NAFTA mentality, and it's a very wide world out there that we're living in, Sheldon. But looking at the European Union, it's going through its troubles. This has been going on for some time, this imbalance between the north and the south of Europe among the 27 nations. How do you see that sorting itself out, say, over the next 5 to 10 years, where, again, there's this equilibrium, but also the equilibrium as far as the cost and quality of life, not just manufacturing and banking and those kinds of things. Because if you don't have a quality of life balance, there's not much balance.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, Spain has huge unemployment, 25%, I think. Greece we all know about. I'm more optimistic on Europe than most have been. I think they are in the muddle through process. It seems like the huge risk have diminished greatly in the last 6 months. Interest rates on Spanish and Italian government bonds were like 7+%. They've now dropped to around 4 and 5. So they've rallied dramatically.
So all this really is moving in the right direction.
It is. There are problems, they're known, but they are being dealt with. And there will be pain, but longer term, some think Europe will emerge far stronger than it has been.
Well, I think this is what's happening in the United States, and if you even, you know, China, but if you look at things that are going on, you know, Russia, Brazil, India, and all that, you know, all these economies are struggling, but they're struggling, it looks like, in a positive way, of where maybe for the first time of a world economy, people are really serious about structural change, about transparency, about trying to reduce the amount of corruption and all the other things that are going on. And this is just really, it's really important to do that.
I think you're right. Crisis creates opportunity to talk about and correct things that couldn't even have been mentioned a few years ago. We're seeing that in this country and in Europe especially.
Yeah, well, even in China too. As
Oh,
far
absolutely.
as the openness, as far as what they're discussing. And I think that's good. Even though the European Union, 27 nations, about the same size economically, maybe a little larger than the United States, you know, as a collective, how do you think this, what's going on now, is going to impact the euro, and do you see that as continuing as we go towards 2050?
Yeah, it's interesting that all the gloom and doom in Europe throughout 2012, the euro rose against the dollar. That's a fact. The S&P 500 was up about 16%. Germany's market, the DAX, was up 29%.
Those are incredible numbers.
So that most people kind of surprised, but those are the facts. I think the euro will be with us. It'll be a reserve currency. Europe will stay together. Even Greece will probably stay within the euro. And there are other countries actually trying to get into Europe, the European Monetary Union, believe it or not.
Yeah, well, it's just like Turkey has been trying to get in for many years. You know, it's like, you know, France and others saying, you know, thank you, but no thanks.
Turkey may be glad it didn't get into it at this point.
And I was going to say, Turkey is very glad that we stayed right where we are. But looking at this hullabaloo over the United States as the reserve currency for the world, China says, hey, we need to have an alternative currency, maybe a basket of currencies and all that. They talk about it, it goes away.
Right.
It's talked about, it goes away. Do you think there's anything there? Is this really political posturing, or is there really something behind this?
I don't know that China wants that role. At some point this century, China's renminbi will be a reserve currency for the world. Keep in mind that it's 2013. That's 87 more years to get up to that status. One interesting fact, though, I'm told, that when China's economy is larger than the U.S., that the World Bank and IMF may have to move to Beijing because they're supposed to be headquartered in the world's largest economy.
Well, that's going to be an interesting dynamic.
Yes.
And talk about politics.
Right.
You know, I'm not sure we want to go there. But looking at the countries, I just made a little list here: India, Brazil, Russia, South Africa. You got the countries along the Andean Highway, you know, Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, down to Argentina. You know, all these economies are growing. India's having its challenges, but it looks like with all of the media on, you know, corruption and restructuring and all that, in spite of all the news, it really is heading in the right way.
I think we're making progress.
Well, we really are getting out of time. So about 10 seconds, what do you see for the future?
Well, I must say that these are all my personal comments, not my firm, but I think you're right. I think the world is going in the right direction with more transparency, anti-corruption, and freer trade.
And hold the course as we move to create the Emerald Planet.
I helped turn my child's public school into a whole new kind of school. One with a curriculum that really motivates kids. One that has extended hours, 6 days a week, year-round. With loads of academic, cultural, and recreational activities. One that has support services like medical and dental right there. A school where parents' involvement is encouraged, where teachers have more time to teach, and students are excited about learning. There's just one problem. My child doesn't ever want to come home. You can help turn your school into a community school for excellence. Find out how. Call 1-877-LOVE-TO-LEARN.
It's coming. Right to your neighborhood. And when it does, you may be surprised. It's your Social Security statement of your benefits, and it's going to help you plan your financial future. Your benefit statement will tell you how much Social Security you're eligible to receive and when you'll get it. Then you'll know how much you need to save for retirement, because that's coming too. The future is in your hands. Choose to save.
The toxic fumes from this meth lab are seeping into Jamie's sinus cavity. Ammonia vapors invade her throat. Toxic gases fill her lungs. Jamie's body is deteriorating. And she doesn't even know it.
Jamie, dinner.
So, who has the drug problem now? Find out how meth affects you at drugfree.org/.
We're back to the Inside Scoop Emerald Planet. Here again, your host, Dr. Sam.
Hello and welcome to the Emerald Planet as we come to you looking around the globe for the best practices, the 1,000 best practices we call them, for the technologies, services, and products in 143 nations. As we look to the globe, it's going to be growing by 2 billion people, rapidly urbanizing to where over 70% of the people of the planet will be living in urban areas. And one of the big challenges, of course, is how we're going to provide the jobs, create the new businesses that is going to take us to 2050, which we call paving the way to the middle of the 21st century. I have a gentleman who's an absolute expert with me on that. He's been here before. He will be here again. We love having him. Chuck D. Vollmer, who goes by his Charles, but we call him Chuck, and he's the founder, publisher of Jobonomics and the CEO of eCycle USA, and this is something that is added new to what we've been talking about. So Chuck, refresh us about Jobonomics. What does it mean?
Well, thank you, Sam. Jobonomics deals with the economics of business, job, wealth, and tax revenue creation. We wrote a book about it. This is the book, you've seen that before, and it's we call it The Plan for America. Our goal is 20 million new jobs by 2020. That's what we think is going to require, is necessary to get the country back into prosperity.
Well, the whole thing about the 20 by 20, as you call it, I just love that idea. And yet all the politicians and all the think tanks and everybody saying, we can't do this. And yet you're saying, you know, in the book, on TV, and all the speeches you give around the United States and the globe, we can do this. Why aren't we doing it?
Well, you talk about the pundits. Your former speaker, your former panelist, Shelton, talked a lot about China. If you look at China, in the last 2 decades, they rose 400 million people out of poverty in 2 decades. So when people tell me that America can't get 20 million new private sector jobs by 2020 in 1 decade, I think it's very short-sighted.
Well, I think this whole thing about being short-sighted, that we're really looking at where we were maybe 50 years ago as far as large-scale businesses were really the drivers as far as the economy. And most people are beginning to find out that small business is the driver as far as employment is concerned and creating the new jobs that we need as we move towards 2050.
Absolutely. About 150 years ago, the bulk of the American society lived on the farm or on the ranch. And then 50 years ago, they were in manufacturing. Now less than 6% are in farming, ranching, and manufacturing. And we've urbanized our communities, so we got to find a new way to do it. And so we need to move either to more rural kind of communities, or in the cities, we need to go to more virtual. And our plan, a 20 by 20, looks at 80% of those jobs are new small business job or self-employed businesses.
Yeah, looking at that, I know talking about we talk about jobs, you know, it's jobs, 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 and more jobs, but really the mantra as far as Jobonomics is concerned, it's almost a sense of misnomer. It's really small business creation is where we're going to have to go.
Yeah,
not just want to go, but have to go in the future.
It's an absolute necessity. I brought a little model along to talk about what the jobs and the employment opportunities are in the United States, if you'd like to show
Yeah, absolutely. Show us that.
Well, let me just build this model up in front of your viewers here. First of all, there is a total of 315 million people in the United States. So I'm going to build this little model up. In the United States, we have about 102 million people that work for the private sector. These are the people that are working. On top of that, we have the government workers, and there's 32 million government workers. Now, these are the people that are employed. Okay, we spend a lot of time talking about the unemployed. These are the people that are looking for work. and there's 22 million unemployed. Now this is considered the civilian workforce. So we're talking about 7.8% unemployed, 22 million people. That is of this total number. That's about 154 million. But I just got done telling you there are 315 million people in the country.
And this is something that most people really forget about. We think of the United States stumping along, you know, in the 200 million range, but the population has grown dramatically over the last 10 years.
Yeah.
And our mentality really hasn't kept up with that.
That's right. But let's complete the rest of the equation. Now, what is interesting is that we have 88 million people that can work that don't work. And then we have...
Now, let's go back to that. 88 million people that can work but are not working?
That's right. Let me finish the last block on our pyramid here. We also have 70 million people that can't work. So at the top, we have people that can't work.
All right, now let's talk about these can't work folks.
They're mainly children.
Okay, they're young, the old, the retired, those types.
That's right.
Okay.
So at the top of the pyramid now, or the top of this blocks here, we have 315 million. Let's take out the children because they can't work.
And the elders, right?
And the elders, you know, or the infirm or whatever, take them away. Now we have the people that can work in the country. Former segment talked about China, India, Peru. You talked about all those that are growing. We're actually, we're going in the opposite direction. This 88 million people here that can work or not work has grown since this new president, Barack Obama, and I go back to 2000 or whatever, is grown by 9 million people. In the same period, the employed group down here is only grown by 500,000 people. We are growing, I'll say that again, this has grown in the last 20 years by 22 million people, from 66 million people to 88 million.
That's an incredible number, Chuck. And this is something, why don't we hear about this as far as the media is concerned?
Because they don't look at these guys, they tend to look at here, because that's what the unemployment rate is based on. If you add these people that have discouraged workers will move from this position, when they quit looking for work, they move up into this category, and they're really off the grid.
And if they look, they enter this area, then they really are no longer considered as far as being unemployed. It's just they cease to exist as far as the numbers.
Yeah, they're just kind of off the grid. Now there is a Bureau of Labor Statistics does calculate the number, but nobody ever pays attention. So if you looked at the people that are underemployed, unemployed, or just can't work, or are not looking for work that can work, if we add those up, the unemployment rate wouldn't be 7.8%, it'd be 35%.
Now that's an incredible number.
And this top category, the people that can work, that don't work, that have just quit looking for work. Now there are different categories. For example, there's 20 million people in that are going to college. But then the other side, the people that are looking for college, you know, a lot of them are there because they can't find a job. Then there's a large group that just, you know, they're living off subsistence. So at the bottom line of Jobonomics is that these are the guys down here on the base of the block in this particular area that are supporting everybody else, including these people. They're
the ones that cannot work.
That's right. Well, everybody. Right. The government guys are getting paid from taxes. They are paying taxes. These guys can't. They got unemployment insurance. These guys are getting different forms of welfare, and in fact, Jobonomics calls it the invisible depression. And that's what the United States is, and until we recognize that, and there's a lot of ways that we can do growth, and that's what we're focused on, is how do we provide new employment opportunities for these people here.
Because that's the whole thing I was going to get to. We have these distressing numbers, but Emerald Planet is all about the possible, what can we do, and where we're going to go in the future, because it's not sustainable that you have this number of people that are not actually contributing to society. And so they're not contributing in many different ways because they're taking services out of it, but they're not paying back into it. So where are we going in the future, Jobonomics-wise, as far as being able to create new businesses, which in turn will create new jobs?
First of all, I'm very optimistic that we can lift, you know, people out of poverty or give them job opportunities, but we need to focus on small and emerging and self-employed businesses. The politicians tend to focus on either government jobs or big business jobs. Big business hasn't had one new net job in the last 3 decades, so by default, it's a small business. And small business, since the beginning of this decade, has created 66% of all the new jobs with their hands tied behind their back.
Yeah, and also too, at the same time, government seems like it's impeding, the small businesses, through taxation, through local regulations, zoning, and all these other kinds of things. So we need to really look at that. And I think that's what you're talking about, Chuck, through the Jobonomics book and all the speaking you're doing and all that, is get out of the way and let these people move forward and do something and contribute to society.
Yeah, there's obviously the political rhetoric is about training and some tax incentives, but really need to finance the base of the pyramid. And so Jobonomics has really 3 demographics we're focusing on. The first demographic is the Gen Yers, a 20-year-old. And our concentration is on the next generation internet technology with a financial background that uses cloud computing, secure things. And the idea is that the next generation will reinvent small businesses. They could be home-based businesses, they could be emerging businesses. And the country is blessed, but that we have all the biggies. We got Facebook, we have Amazon, we got Apple, we got Microsoft.
All the social media
all
networking.
The social media. If we can monetize the social media, okay, and the next, for the Gen Ys who don't want to have a career like you and I have had, we can create 20 million new jobs.
We've got a minute and a half, so we got to get through the next 2 quick.
Okay, the second one was women-owned business. We think that women are going to be the backbone of the economy for the next decade, the maternal businesses. And we're not talking about women in business, we're doing women-owned business. We just launched our California initiative for 1 million new California women-owned businesses by 2020. And the third area that we're very actively involved is in the inner cities that we'll talk about in the next segment.
Okay, and the last thing I wanted to bring up, business incubators versus community-based business generators. Incubators, generators, what is it?
Okay, first of all, incubators are in a lot of cities, but they tend to be high-tech. They're looking for the next Bill, Gates, Steve Jobs, and that type of thing. We are doing in a dozen cities community-based business generator to mass-produce small businesses, like in Detroit or Atlanta and New York, 1,000 new businesses a year. And we have sponsors that are sponsoring those, and we'll talk about a little bit more in the next segment of how that works. And we think that we can do that in 100 cities, and we could ramp up from 1,000 new businesses, again, small business, self-employed businesses, to many, thousands of businesses each year.
Okay, how can we leapfrog around the globe doing what you're talking about and take about 20 seconds doing it?
Well, we have been approached by the Chinese, the Indians, the Europeans, and as well as the Arab Middle East about Jobonomics and those. Right now we're focusing on the United States to make the model work at home.
And then move it out from there.
Yes.
I tell you, it's just really fascinating. And this business incubators versus the business generators, I love that concept. We've talked a lot about it. We're going to bring it up in the next segment. Thank you for being with us as we create the Emerald Planet.
This is firstgov.gov, where we're obsessed with getting you government information.
Brand new student loan applications on the site, baby. This calls for a celebration. Where's your uncle?
So in the end, it was either take the astronaut gig or come work here. What can I say? Duty called.
Dude, that's my cop.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. No, I'm pretty sure that's Sam's cop.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. No. Sam's? No.
Just log on or email us and get what you need.
C, change of address form. That's how it's done.
D, driver's license renewal.
E, emailing Social Security information.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Nice, we'll allow it. All right, Ed.
What are those? Government surplus cars for auction.
You posted those online last time.
No, you did.
I'm posting them online this time!
For all your government information, firstgov.gov.
Oh, what have we got here? Sometimes you feel tired. You can't seem to lose those extra pounds off your midsection. And your joints hurt when you take the stairs? Well, you're getting older. But I'm happy to say that there's some simple things we can do to keep you happy and healthy for years to come. We can also lower your risk for some serious diseases the older population is often subject to. Proper nutrition is more important than ever. Your body has changed, not as many treats. A basic exercise plan, lots of walks and fresh air, and most importantly, Come and see me for twice yearly checkups to help ensure the best possible quality of life. Now, how does that sound? Good boy.
Improve the quality of life for your elderly pet. Schedule twice yearly checkups that include preventive care and regular lab work. A message from the veterinary members of the American Animal Hospital Association.
We're back to the Inside Scoop Emerald Planet. Here again, your host, Dr. Sam.
Welcome back to the Emerald Planet as we come to you from Washington, D.C. in the United States. I'm Dr. Sam Hancock, the President, Executive Director of the organization. And I must say we're moving towards 40 years as we've been working around the globe in 143 different nations, looking for the 1,000 best practices for the technologies, the services, and the products as we move towards 2050. And so as we look towards 2050 and adding the great number of people, 2 billion is estimated by 2050, how are we going to develop the infrastructure and then be able to pay for that? That's something that my good friend Charles D. Vollmer, goes by the name of Chuck, who's been with us before. He's founder and publisher of Jobonomics and also CEO of eCycling USA, which is about electronic waste. And we're going to kick off with that. But Chuck, just a quick recap of Jobonomics, and we're going to move right into the demographics and then eCycling, how it's one of those examples of where we're moving towards 2020.
Sure. Thank you, Sam. Jobonomics is based on the book called Jobonomics. You can get this anywhere. You can also, if you would like, go to jobonomics.com and read up about it.
I was going to say that, but okay, we'll say it again at the end.
Okay, thank you, sir. The last segment we talked about the problem, about the employment versus the unemployment, that the unemployment is growing at great rates, and the only way that we think the country can really revitalize itself is through growing the employment opportunities. We focus on small, emerging, and self-employed businesses.
Well, looking at the three demographics, I know we've talked about this huge block of people that are able-bodied, mind, have all their facilities, and yet are not actually into the job market. And so what are the three demographics, and how can we start pulling these people back in to make them feel like they can actually contribute to society, and in essence, they are contributing to society?
Yes, exactly. The Bureau of Labor Statistics called it not in the labor force, and that number has grown from 66 million to 88 million since year 2000. Since the president has taken office, it's grown by 8 million. Compared to the fact that we've only added, since the president has taken office, about 500,000 new jobs, as opposed to 8-9 million leaving the workforce. And so our focus is largely on those people that can work and that are not working, and we have three demographics. We have the Gen Yers, we have women-owned businesses, and we have the inner city businesses.
Well, looking at, let's go to the hop in the middle here as far as the female. This is one of the phenomena that we've identified over the many years we've been around in Emerald Planet, is that if you look at women-owned businesses, the world really sits on the back of all these female entrepreneurs. And it may be a small, one woman, Higgler, she goes and buys goods and takes it to the next town over. But yet there's some significant businesses that have been created over the years by the females, and they really almost undergird almost every economy there is.
That's right. Right now, our belief is that this decade, and perhaps the next one to come, are going to be dominated by women-owned businesses. It's different than women in business. We focus on women-owned business. There's approximately 10 million women-owned businesses in the United States. About 90% of them are self-employed businesses. And so we believe that we could double that number. And because there are more women available, they're more highly educated men, and then most of the new jobs are more maternalistic oriented, like education and healthcare and those types of things.
And then the elder care that we've talked about
right.
in years past too.
And so we are putting together this initiative, essentially Jobonomics community-based business generators, to help launch new businesses, to make it turnkey businesses, And women are going to be a significant part of that. The women demographic is going to be a significant part of that. And by the way, for women self-employed or home-based businesses, we think are just as viable as, 10 of those are equal to one company with 10 employees that are really pretty easy to institute, and there is a lot of growth in these particular areas that we're helping them pursue.
Well, this is one thing that we don't realize. 50 years ago, the majority of men were going into the universities and graduating with degrees. Now the women have far outpaced the men, regardless of socioeconomic or ethnic backgrounds. But at the same time, they make up 54% of the population, so they are the majority as far as the population. And the ones that are going through, as you said, they're more highly educated. This is something I don't think that not only the public doesn't really grasp, but actually the politicians and the institutions don't grasp the long-term impact these females are going to have.
Yeah, well, Chilmanomic's university concept goes don't go to school to get a degree, go to school to build a business and get a matching degree. And consequently, we have a lot of people that are going. There's 20 million people in secondary education, in college education, junior college, or those types of, or universities, with only 50% chance of many of them getting a job. So the question is, if you can't get a job, then orient yourself to learning how to build a business, which will either help you run the business or put you a leg up in actually getting a job.
Well, looking at this idea of the community-based business generators versus the business incubators, most people understand the incubators and bringing people in, help them to go out. But you're looking at, you've already moved past that, where you're talking about actual generators of business within local communities. And this goes really to the third segment, the inner city, where you have a great concentration of people. There's a lot of energy. In most cases, there are decent infrastructure there. How do these business generators going to help propel the economy along towards 2020?
In the Jobonomics movement, we spent a lot of time on Capitol Hill and it got nowhere. Okay, but when we went to the mayors, we made significant progress. And each of the mayors saying, hey, look, our people are looking for handouts rather than handouts, excuse me. And there's a common perception that the inner cities are largely basket cases, where they're a nanny state. It's been our experience that we find 20–25% of the people that really are interested and that are entrepreneurial enough to start their own business. Now, in the inner cities, because of the educational disadvantage in many cases, we're focusing on trade level activities.
Well, the whole thing is, though, through these business generators, you're tying into the community colleges and other types of ways of getting formal education. But you take like a gentleman like Michael Faulkner in Harlem and New York, the 300 churches he has, Temple of Praise in Washington, D.C., with the employment ministries they have. There's tremendous energy and there's resources there to actually bring people in, and they are actively going after that.
Yeah, you're naming the groups that we work with. We're working with in Harlem, Washington, D.C., Atlanta, Chester, Pennsylvania, Roanoke, Virginia, Detroit, Dallas, you name it. So we've got a number of things, and we've talked to the mayors. They have the infrastructure and things, but they got all these people dressed up with no place to go. And the issue that they have now is, how do you get this financing? So we've gone to the wealth management experts and all the rest of this stuff that it is just very difficult. We've gone to the banks that are very difficult, with the exception in Harlem, we've got a $20 million micro business loan set up with a maximum loan of $50,000. But we've come up with a unique way of raising capital.
And I want to go right in that way. That was the perfect tee up to talk about e-cycling.
Right.
What is e-cycling, and how does that relate to not only just generating new jobs and opportunities, but also addresses what we're concerned about is the environment?
E-cycling came about as a result of us going into all these inner cities, and they've got people all dressed up where they're ready to go to start their own businesses, but they don't have the financing. The banks won't give it to them, the investment groups won't give it to them, the government money's drying up, so where do we go? So we met with a bunch of people in Europe, and we looked at what they do on electronic waste recycling. Now, electronic waste can be everything from computers to refrigerators. That's whiteware and electronic waste. And they have a system that we're working with a joint venture partner in Europe that has 60 plants. And if they throw a refrigerator on the conveyor belt, in about 2 or 3 minutes, about 10 minutes maybe, it comes out as as raw materials. And I'll just shake this a little bit to give you the viewers here. Look, this used to be a refrigerator, a small part of a refrigerator, but it comes out as copper, aluminum, iron, and plastics. Now, as talked in a former segment, with Ray or Shelton, that, for example, copper is going for $10,000 a ton now. And so if I can turn these electronic waste and whiteware in the metropolitan areas, and so I say, Mr. Mayor, or Miss Mayor, why are you giving tens of millions of dollars of raw materials away every month?
Yeah, and the whole thing too is that you're paying huge tipping fees for people to cart this off and then put it in a landfill, actually, which stays there longer than a cemetery would be in an area. So
and that's the other thing we asked the mayor, say, not only that, you're paying people to take this money.
That's a critical issue.
And they said, what do you mean? I said, look, the Europeans are well ahead of us on zero landfill, and they can locally process. So if I take all your refrigerators, all your computers, and I could turn it into commodities, and I could sell this in the commodities market, and I can get tipping fees, for people dropping this off, I can fund these business generators in just jobs related to it. For example, we can have hauling business, pickup business, and we can either team with the existing ones, like in Detroit, we're teamed with Trash It. They will create new businesses to support their operation. We're also working with the demolition contractors in Detroit. They're tearing 10,000 homes. And so they need demolition companies. They need environmental remediation companies. They need, we're working with Detroit Edison, that they need, we call them rate recoverable businesses. They need people to weatherize homes, to put solar panels on homes. We're working through Emerald Planet with companies to do urban agriculture. If we turn down these homes, we can do urban agriculture. So in Detroit, what they need, I can dig on this electronic waste recycling. I can put $30 million a year into that business generator and create tens of thousands of new small businesses for just the sponsors that we have in Detroit by taking the materials out of the electronic waste stream, selling the commodities market. Now the tipping fees, as you said, in Harlem, we're teamed with 250 churches. You and I went down to in Washington, D.C., Temple of Praise, and we said, look, if you can give us your top 1%, the ones that you think are entrepreneurial, we will set them up with a turnkey business. And we will also, once that business is created, okay, we will have contracts for them to keep it going.
We have only about 30 seconds left. Chuck, how are we going to get this money from the e-cycle, e-waste, into these nonprofits within local communities?
Okay,
got to be quick.
The top three are Detroit, Atlanta, and Roanoke, Virginia. Hopefully we'll have these underway this year. We're going to set them up as B corporation, benefit corporations, and we're going to pledge a minimum of 10% of all profits if we own and operate it through the business generator.
That's fantastic. And we're going to sit here and talk about this because this is a great idea, because what we're talking about, Chuck, really is long-term sustainability.
Amen.
As far as the communities and all that is concerned. And this is something that we need to be looking at not only in the United States, but also around the globe. And I think this is what you're doing. Thank you, viewers, for being with us as we create the Emerald Planet.